Hello and welcome to Café Transatlántico. This is our coffee talk series that we do to bring together different aspects of our culture and to study the links between the culture of the United States and Spain. Today, we are very happy to have with us three curators, two Americans and one Spanish. We have Corey Piper, Brandon Ruud, and Clara Marcellán. And they're going to explore the intersections of Spanish and American art in both countries. And there's a very good occasion right now because we have two exhibitions that are going on that are very good excuse to do this talk. No? One is an exhibition that is happening right now in the Chrysler Museum of Art, Americans in Spain, Painting and Travel, 1820-1920. That is, as I say, currently in display in the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk. And it will be opening in the Milwaukee Art Museum in June. And then there's an upcoming retrospective of Georgia O'Keeffe in the Museo Nacional Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid. So this is what brings us here together. We have, as I said, the three curators. Clara Marcellán is a curator of modern painting at the Museo Nacional Thyssen-Bornemisza, where she's been working since 2009. With a focus on its European and American 19th century paintings. She has also coordinated several temporary exhibitions, and she holds a Bachelor of Art History from Madrid's Universidad Autónoma. Brandon Ruud is the Ebert Family Curator of American Art at the Milwaukee Art Museum, where he's responsible for the American collections to 1950. He has also organized several exhibitions. She holds an MA from the Department of Art History at George Washington University and a PhD in American art from the University of Illinois, Chicago. And Corey Piper has served as the Brock Curator of American Art since at the Chrysler Museum of Art since 2017. He earned a PhD in the history of American art from the University of Virginia and previously held curatorial positions at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. He's also has curated a lot of exhibitions. Well, we have the three, and I'm gonna leave the floor to Clara. They have a lot of things in common, and they have a lot of things to talk. So I will, we will leave, as always, a little space at the end, so that if there's any questions from the audience, that we could take those questions. So, Clara, thanks a lot, and you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Miguel, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today, and it's actually very funny. I was happily surprised when I received the invitation for this talk, because as we speak, we are installing the last works for the Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition, and the last works we are installing actually come from the two museums where Corey and Brandon work. We have three works coming from the Milwaukee Art Museum and one wonderful big patio door that Georgia O'Keeffe painted from the Chrysler Museum. So thank you, Brandon and Corey, for those loans, and we are so excited to present this Georgia O'Keeffe retrospective in Madrid. When we thought about topics we could discuss today, first thing that came up was maybe explaining how we first met, and it was 3 years ago almost, and it was actually because of this Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition. I was on a courier trip to Milwaukee, and they have an amazing Georgia O'Keeffe collection. So I contacted Brandon, who is in charge of this part of their collection, to check the availability of Georgia O'Keeffe's works and just to introduce him to the project. And I was there because we had loaned a Winslow Hummer work for a project Brandon had presented at the Milwaukee Art Museum. So that's how we first met. And then Brandon came to Madrid, and he came accompanied by Corey, because they were working on a project together, and they were interested in some of the works we have at the Museo Thyssen. So yes, and that's how we all ended up here somehow. I don't know if Brandon or Corey want to add something to this, because I know they also met because of a courier trip the first time, and it had something to do with Spain as well.
Sure, I can just add that I also met Brandon as he was working on his Winslow Hummer project. I had just started here at the Chrysler Museum, so he was also borrowing work from here and came through on a career trip. And that's sort of how we got teamed up together on this project when we had the opportunity to come visit you, Clara, at the Thyssen. But actually my first time in Madrid was also related to a project. I was traveling as a courier about 10 years ago now for an Edward Hopper exhibition that was done at the Thyssen-Bornemisza. And so I think it's just very interesting that some of these exhibitions, you know, even as we're traveling around and working and connecting with each other, it's not always clear exactly what the relationships, what they're going to develop into, but they often bear fruit in interesting and sometimes unexpected ways much further down the road.
No, I would agree, and I would just add to that. Yes, it was through this circle, the Winslow Hummer exhibition, that I was first introduced, of course, to Clara personally and her project, and then Corey and what he was working on, and then started discussing Americans in Spain. And Corey's absolutely right. It was thinking about the collections of the Museo Thyssen and that courier trip for the Edward Hopper exhibition that really started me thinking, and this is going back 10 years ago, I think, about the American collections in Spain, the influence of Spanish art on painters from the United States. And then it was really through these encounters and these other projects and getting to know Corey and talking about this and the excellent collections at Chrysler and how these could be used with the resources in Milwaukee and formulate this exhibition. And then it all just came together through these wonderful connections.
Yeah. We were discussing the other day how rare our American art collection from the 19th century is here at the Thyssen. It's not very common to find American paintings from the 19th century in European museums. So this is something that really makes us to be in touch and connected with many American museums and scholars who are interested in these paintings. So it's something we sort of have tried to study, and right now we actually have a fellow who's devoted to studying the American collection at the museum. And this year we are celebrating the centenary of Baron Thyssen's birth, and we are focusing on certain aspects of him as a collector. And this will be one of these aspects of him as a collector that we will present during the winter, his collection of American art. And this fellow who's here thanks to the Terra Foundation for American Art is doing a great research on our collection. So, and we will present like a new installation of this American collection we have during the winter. And it's great to lend these works to projects like the one Cody and Brandon have prepared, Americans in Spain, and the one about Winslow Hummer Brandon presented, because it really makes us know more and more about these works, and lets us present them also to the Spanish and European audiences that are not so well acquainted with this part of art history, the American painting from the 19th century. And I believe you also have a good representation of American art in your collections, Brandon and Cody, which you've used for your project as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the strengths of the collection at the Milwaukee Art Museum is the American collection. Not surprisingly, the Georgia O'Keeffe's that you mentioned as production. Of course, one of the springboards for the exhibition for us is we have one of the largest and richest collections of the Ashcan School and the 8 in the country. And for those who might not be familiar with them, this was a group of artists considered America's first modernists in the late 19th, first decades of the 20th century, focusing on urban cityscapes, looking at gender roles, labor roles, these kind of modern art themes and subjects. And the leader of this group, the de facto leader of this group, Robert Henry, was the artist from the United States who most visited Spain, a total of 7 times between 1900 and 1926. And he really introduced Spanish art to a whole generation of American painters. He often went on study trips. He took his students with him. He used them to assist him in his studio, often taking photographs of the subjects. They painted the same portraits and subjects together. And it was looking at this collection that really started us thinking, in addition to some of the resources mentioned earlier, about the influence of Spanish culture and Spanish art on American painters, not just Henry or the Ashcan School, but so many others as well. And so for us, that was really kind of the starting point. And then again, teaming up with Corey, and I don't know if he kind of wants to add to that about the Chrysler's collections.
Sure. We have a tremendous American collection here, a very encyclopedic collection at the Chrysler that covers a lot of ground, but the intersections with Spain in the 19th century among American painters in the early 20th century, it really wasn't a story that was well told in our collection, our American art collection. But as we began researching and digging, there were some threads that I think connected in interesting ways through the gift of Walter P. Chrysler Jr., which came to the museum in 1971 as really kind of the foundational collection of the museum. And that added a number of Spanish Old Master painters to our collection, Velázquez and Claudio Coelho, and a couple of others, but also some interesting works that connect up other threads, like an Edward Manet copy that he made in the Louvre of the Little Cavaliers, a painting he thought at the time was by Velázquez. And we had one painting by Robert Henry of a Spanish subject. So it was kind of a way to sort of tease out and develop these threads that were signposts throughout the collection, but didn't necessarily tell a whole complete story together. And then we also had an opportunity through this project, I think, to develop the collection further in interesting ways, particularly in our photography collections, which is a major component of the Chrysler. But when we started on this exhibition, we had only a single 19th century photograph of Spain. And so we were able to add some really interesting and important examples of photographers working in Spain, like Jean Laurent or Charles Clifford, to really make that a very strong part of the collection. So it's really been an opportunity to both draw upon the resources we have here, but also in looking at the kind of stories we wanted to tell to develop more interesting and compelling things for our audience through this exhibition, which tells a really fascinating new story, but also I think for the future collecting for the future museum as well.
Yeah, in our case, we had a pretty good starting point because we have 5 works by Georgia O'Keeffe in the collection, and I think it's actually biggest number of works by Georgia O'Keeffe in a museum outside of the US. So it was actually, yeah, the core of the exhibition at the beginning, and we started building up on that. And what helped the most was actually our partnership with the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe, who who were very, very generous with us and have been extremely supportive. And they also helped us learn many, many things about George O'Keeffe, particularly technical aspects, for example. And so it's been a very close collaboration with them, and it's really helped us, yeah, find out many, many things we didn't know about our paintings. And so it's been very, very interesting, that part of the collaboration with them. And I couldn't travel to Santa Fe, but Marta did, and she visited all of George O'Keeffe's places in New Mexico. And I wanted you to let us know a little bit about your trip to Spain when you came here to prepare your project. And I was very excited when I read that you had found a Mary Cassatt painting in a private collection in Madrid, because there aren't that many in Spain. I only knew the one in the Museo de Bellas Artes de Bilbao. And yeah, I was hoping you could tell us more about that trip, the experience of visiting the places those artists you had been working on visited themselves. And
yeah, I'm happy to start with that one. And the credit for the rediscovery of the Cassatt paintings, there are actually two in a Spanish private collection, is largely owed to the collector himself and to Betsy Boone, a scholar on American artists in Spain, wrote an incredible essay for the exhibition catalog. And she started conversations with Manuel Garcia, the owner of the two Cassatt paintings, a few years ago. This resulted in a publication she did revealing these new discoveries of the Cassatt and their history in Spain. The assumption, of course, has always been that so many artists from the United States visited Spain multiple times for extended trips that there must be things that, as Betsy put it, were left behind. Any number of canvases left in studios or given as gifts or collected. And these are two examples. And I think a lot of the credit also goes to Manolo, if I may, Manuel Garcia, the collector, for really connecting the dots and threading all of this together and making the contact with Betsy and having them confirmed to be by Cassatt and in these collections. And the history is really fascinating in a couple of ways, going back to your original point, Clara, about American artists in the Museo Thyssen collection and what Spanish audiences know about it, and the projects and programs you're working on versus what American audiences know about Spanish art and that history. Because after visiting Manolo, gosh, it was about just over a year ago, I was also in Sevilla conducting other research for the project, the exhibition, and on Cassatt. And you think of someone like Mary Cassatt as so well known in the United States for art lovers and museum goers and fans of Impressionism, and they would stand in line to see a Cassatt exhibition. And she lived in Sevilla for 6 months at the Casa de Pilatos. And when I went there and was searching around, could find no records, could find almost nothing, was asking several people there about her experience, and it was Cassatt who, Mary what, no one had ever heard of her. And of course, we think otherwise in the United States, but I think it's interesting that going back to the idea of travel as relevant to the exhibition and how we all connected and whatnot, it was the last time that I was in Spain was on that visit. And that's when the pandemic started to happen. And I was recalled back to the United States and have not been anywhere since. So
Yeah, there's things have changed a lot, but I'm also like very surprised and very happy to see that things still work and move forward. And it's surprising that both our projects have opened to the public somehow, because so many things have shut down or stopped, that we are, as I said, extremely happy to see this coming to real shape and showing everything to everyone. It's funny that you mentioned that Casat sort of didn't leave a trace in Spain, because with Georgia Keefe is actually a bit similar. She's not very well known in Spain, actually. Many people would ask, but is it a man or a woman, or they don't really know who she is. And I know in the US she's like an icon. Everyone knows everything, her work and her appearance, everything. But here she's yet to be discovered. And she was also in Spain, but she doesn't seem to have left a trace here, and Spain doesn't seem to have left a trace in her work either. But it's interesting because she came here twice, so she liked Spain, or she was interested, or in coming back after her first visit in 1953. And then she came back in 1954 for a more extended period. She was here around 3 months. She went to Sevilla as well, and of course she came to Madrid and went to the Prado. But yeah, it's interesting how there's no trace. So we are happy to remind people of that trip as a starting point for this project that Marta started working on. Marta, my colleague, Marta Ruiz del Árbol, started working on almost 4 years ago. And we are very eager to let people know about her, because she's such an important figure in the art history of the 20th century. And not only for the States, but also for Western art history in general. So we hope a lot of people come to visit the show here. And
sorry, I was going to ask, what then were your expectations of O'Keeffe as you started embarking on this project, and have they changed significantly? And I'm happy to turn the tables and ask the same question to me and Corey, or Corey, about our experience with American artists in Spain.
Well, the first goal was just to give a complete overview of Georgia O'Keeffe's work, because that's like a very needed introduction to her work for the European audiences. But then as Marta started focusing on certain aspects, it became very clear that the focus would be on her creative process. And since the starting point was her traveling to Spain, Marta started researching, and we both started trying to find out more things about her travels, which started very late. She didn't start traveling outside of the US until the 1950s, so she was already in her 60s. But she traveled all over the US, and she seemed to make very strong connections with the places she visited. And she had this very interesting routine, which was taking very long walks. She could walk 2-3 hours every day, no matter where she was. It could be Manhattan or the desert in New Mexico. And this sort of revealed itself as the starting point of her creative process. So it was very inspiring, and particularly during the lockdown, because we couldn't go out, we couldn't go for walks. So I remember the first days we could go out for walks. I really enjoyed them, and I thought a lot of her and the way she gives closer looks to small things and makes them bigger, and this connection, how she plays with scales and yeah, and how she invites everyone to pause and look at the things around you and stop rushing around and just enjoy the little world in every little object or big landscape. It's both. How about you? What were your expectations when you started working on your project?
I can jump in there, I guess. I think when I started on this exhibition, my understanding really of the topic was much more focused on artistic issues and kind of stylistic issues, you know, how the transmission of style between artists, you know, how William Merritt Chase might look at Velázquez. And I understood it more in an abstract way, perhaps, or an intellectual exercise. But really the sort of experience of travel and the physical experience of travel, I think through working on this exhibition, it's much more clear to me how that worked, but how essential the experience of moving about and physically transporting oneself to different places, how essential it was to that experience. I remember when we were in Madrid on a research trip with Brandon, and I remember him texting me a photo where he's found Robert Henry's address, I think from his registry as a copyist at the Prado, and found the building. And I remember going later that day and seeing that building and you know, understanding the experience of walking to the Prado from the apartment in which they were staying. And so that history of travel was really not very well known to me. And also the extent, you know, the sort of industrial nature of travel during the 19th century. I think I always thought of this modern form of travel with all of its literature and its imagery that surrounded it to be a very recent phenomenon, but it's in fact quite a much older phenomenon that these artists in the 19th century were all really engaged in. And I think as I've been going through the exhibition with people, I think that's one of the things that resonates most with people at this time, seeing the exhibition, that kind of longing for travel that they really, in looking at these paintings that the artists created as they were in Spain or recently returned from Spain, this longing to move around and to experience different places, I think is really connecting deeply with people. It's a little bit of nostalgia and longing to be able to move themselves, but also I think reiterating the importance of what that does for us as, you know, people in the world and how important that is to our way of being.
No, I fully agree with Corey. It was the learning experience of the guidebooks, the photographs that are in the Chrysler collection that Corey mentioned at the beginning, the travelogues, these printed portfolios, the deep impact and influence they had on artists of Western Europe and the United States, kind of guiding their travel, the locations they visited, and in many cases, how they even depicted these. Because my experience, much like Corey's, was stylistic. It was the influence of the old masters, Velázquez and Murillo and Ribera, on all of these artists from the United States, their visits to the Prado. And I think for me, it was just how deep and far-ranging the influence was in so many different ways, and not just limited to the old masters or the Prado, but the connections between 19th century Spanish painters going into the early years of the 20th century, people that are well known in the United States, whether it's Fortuny or Sorolla or to a lesser extent Zuloaga, but also then seeing the costumbrismo paintings, the Raimundo Madrazo and Manuel Barrera and these other artists not well known in the United States or perhaps even to Spanish audiences. And that was a real, for me, kind of revelation and discovery. So many of the subjects, the themes, the genres that they were all painting were so similar and really had these great cross connections between American artists and Spanish artists.
So do you think which of those Spanish artists you were mentioning have been like a revelation for the American public? Have there been any particular cases that?
I think Ignacio Zuloaga in particular is a showstopper in the exhibition. I knew the painting. We have one painting titled, it's called My Uncle Daniel and His Family from the MFA Boston. And it's a massive painting. It's 10 feet wide. So I knew it would make an impression. It's a really monumental group portrait. But I don't think I understood quite how much of a showstopper and a focus it would be for people. And I think part of it is that he's a relatively lesser known painter. Certainly he's someone who in the early 20th century was extremely popular in the United States. It had touring exhibitions. You know, that his work was well collected, but I think it's part of a museological phenomenon that you don't encounter in the United States all that many examples of his work in museums, even though they are held in collections. They're not often on view necessarily. And so I think he's a really unfamiliar figure that carries so much force and impact in his work, and that I think it's quite surprising to people. And I always repeat the line, the work that we have was in an exhibition in 1917 that John Singer Sargent wrote the preface for the catalog. And he said that Zuloaga was the painter that carried forth the twin imperatives of Spanish Old Master painting, that he married realism and transcendence. And I think those are the two qualities of his painting that are so delightful but impactful to people. So I think he's a figure, I think, that was really a major one of the exhibition that I wasn't necessarily sure beforehand that he would be so.
And I think for me, for the Milwaukee Art Museum, it was also these connections that were not deeply explored in the regions or the museum's history. As Corey mentioned, Sorolla, Zuloaga had multiple exhibitions in the United States in the first decades of the 20th century. These were well attended, very popular. They were often at international expositions or solo exhibitions throughout the country, including the Midwest. The first director of the Milwaukee Art Museum was a student of Sorolla. When he came to Chicago and taught, he encouraged the first acquisitions by Sorolla museum out of these exhibitions. And then the Zuloaga exhibition that Corey mentioned, there were also multiple versions that traveled through the Midwest, including up to Milwaukee and then to the Minnesota State Fair. So there was a lot of exposure of many of these Spanish artists in the first decades of the 20th century. Zuloaga, Sorolla, and lesser known ones that were collected by museums, but the visitors really haven't experienced or don't know this history, which is one of the goals of the project, of the exhibition.
Yeah. In our case, I don't think Georgia Keith had been shown in Spain before the Thyssen collection was bought in 1993 by the Spanish state and became like a permanent museum here. And we did have a small Georgia Keith exhibition at the Fundación Juan March in 2001. But it's this is going to be really like the first big retrospective in Spain, and then it will travel on to Paris, to the Centre Pompidou, and then onto the Fondation Beyeler in Switzerland. So I think it's really going to be a turning point for O'Keeffe's reception in Europe and Spain. I hope. And I think people are going to be surprised because almost everyone thinks of the flowers or the bones and those really American landscapes in New Mexico. But some of the people who have been here during the installation are very surprised with the paintings from her later period, when she starts painting skies and horizons, or even the doors we are borrowing from both of you. She's very focused on the door in her patio in Abiquiu, and it becomes like very, very abstract, but it's like this obsession with something around her. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how people come out of the exhibition rooms once they've seen the whole overview of her career. And
so once Georgia O'Keeffe is open or closed, since we've been talking about this, the kind of interconnectedness of all of these projects and how important travel was for O'Keeffe, for artists from the United States to Spain, and then for all of us, of course, in making these connections, formulating these projects, planning, research, all of that. How, once O'Keeffe is open or closed, how do you see the Thyssen working on future projects, international in scope, the range of research or travel related, and then of course for Corey as well?
yeah, there was something we discussed the other day, first time we talked for so long, and it's I think after the pandemic started, we all had to learn to work in a different way, of course. And in our case, we have almost all of our loans come from the US, and usually, as all of us three experienced in the past, every time you lend an important work from your collection, someone has to travel with it and supervise it, and that's what the courier work is. But for the Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition, it was pretty clear, for example, that no physical couriers would travel with the works, and we were a little bit afraid that some institutions would say they wouldn't lend the work unless a physical courier could travel with the works. But in the end, most of the lenders agreed to just supervising the installation and all the shipment virtually. And it also involved a lot of trust in each other, and it has worked pretty well. We are extremely happy with how things went during the shipment and the installation. And yeah, regarding research, it's of course a bit more limited, but everyone is doing a great effort, I think, in all levels, to digitize and share as much as possible. Yeah, so whatever we can. So we are learning to work that way and trying to share everything virtually, like we are doing right now. So how was it for you, for your project? Because everything started in the middle of your project as well, all the pandemic.
Yeah, I think we had similar experiences. I think ran into a lot of challenges of learning how to develop new procedures to share art, the old ways of doing things that we could no longer stick to. And I think, we found similarly that a lot of colleagues who were very generously willing to adapt and learn with us. And I think, we were really surprised and gratified, I think, at the level that people were still committed to these international cross-border projects. And so our experience, I think, was extremely positive in that regard. A lot of generosity from other museums. And I don't know, speaking to the future, I know here at the Chrysler, we have a couple projects in the pipeline that are very much focused on ideas of international exchange, and that will necessitate some international loans. And so I don't think we're deterred by the new way of doing things. I think that we found that people are, doubling down, that the importance of this idea of cultural exchange is really as important as ever. I think, one benefit, I think maybe of all three of our projects, I don't mean to speak for others, but that there was a core focus on connections to our collections, and so that they were rooted in our own collections and our own holdings, that we could, have a nucleus of things to build upon, but also then to develop relationships with other museums out of that as well.
No, and I think for us, it's very similar. The generosity of the lenders, the digitized collections made the final stages of the project very workable, and the collegiality of everyone really to make it happen during these times was amazing, was wonderful. And similar to what Corey was saying, yes, our upcoming projects also have a lot of international threads and connections. So these are ideas and themes we'll be exploring through our permanent collection as well. So I don't see an end to that, though I think, like many museums in the United States, there is a bit of a recalibration on focusing on the permanent collection and bringing things out that many people don't normally get to see, and making these permanent collection exhibitions a bit more of a reality than we might have been looking at in the past. And I think that will continue for the next few years as we continue to explore this new world and way of living and working that we are all.
Yes, I think we are learning to appreciate more what we have nearby. And in our case, for example, now our visitors are mostly the citizens of Madrid, because people from other regions cannot come to Madrid. And so citizens of Madrid are rediscovering our permanent collection, and and they are our usual visitors for temporary exhibitions. So they will of course come to Georgia Kiev, but they are also rediscovering our permanent collection, which we are also like reorganizing and trying to show in different ways. So.
Great. We have a question for you from the audience. Scott Randall is a question for Clara. He says, thank you for such a wonderful talk. I would like to ask Clara if the Spanish landscape influenced Georgia O'Keeffe in her works. Were you able to identify a specific work where you can see this influence? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. It's interesting because we were trying to find some trace of her visits to Spain in her work, but apparently there are no Spanish motifs in her work. We do think that she felt that connection with Spain, maybe because of the cultural heritage she knew from New Mexico, because all this Spanish past in New Mexico was familiar to her, and she studied with William Mary Chase, who organized trips to Spain with his students. So I don't know, she was somehow aware of that importance of Spain for all artists, but no, we didn't find a specific trace of Spain and Spanish landscape in her work. She was very meticulous about her trips to Spain, and they keep boxes with documents about her trips, and she seems to have been very interested in toros, in bullfighting and Easter celebrations as well, so that religious part of our culture, but no apparent trace the Spanish landscape in her work.
Thank you, Clara. And I want to make a question myself, because we were talking before about how art travels, why artists are known in another country of a certain period and why others aren't. And you were saying, Corey, before about Zuluaga and why he was at the time famous in the States. He did exhibitions, and it happened also with Sorolla, obviously, and with Fortuny. But I would like you to, and Clara, you were saying the opposite in this case about Georgia O'Keeffe, why for some reason in Spain it was not so known. Maybe in Spain it's true that it's 19th century painting is not so known, or so we don't give as much value to it, no. So I will ask you if you could point. This is like a journalist question. One Spanish artist of the 19th century that should be known in the States and it's not, and the opposite way. So, Brandon, if you want to start. One or two or three.
Okay. List. A Spanish artist not well known in the United States is, I'm sorry, is that the question?
Yes, of the 19th century, of this period. There's certain that obviously traveled very well at the time because they were famous at the time and sold their paintings at the time, but some of them for a reason didn't, and maybe they were big in Spain but not here.
Yeah, I think that, as you mentioned, as Corey discussed, Fortuny, Sorolla, Zuluaga, those were the major ones, important in large exhibitions, or highly valued and favored by collectors, especially for Fortuny in the 19th century, already entering many museums' collections, and so introduced to a wider audience. I would say, based on my experience, Valentin de Zubiare. I don't know if he's familiar even to the Spanish audience, but this was a colleague, a contemporary of Sorolla and Zuluaga, very well regarded in the late 19th and in particular the first decade of the 20th century. The Milwaukee Art Museum received one of his paintings as a gift, supposedly bought in Sevilla directly from the artist, for what was described at the time a princely sum, to the effect that the people of the city stood in line to view it. And this is another name, along with many of the others we mentioned, that has not necessarily in the United States been canonized, that people are not familiar with, even in our own city. And I don't even know how well known, how highly regarded he is among Spanish art historians or in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Corey?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't know if I have additional names to add than those that Brandon mentioned, or already. I think Zuluaga is one who's definitely primed for some re-interest in the United States. And I might reiterate, an artist like Mariano Fortuny is, I think, among art lovers, is a generally known name in the United States, but not certainly a household name, but an artist that I think was one of the most famous and sensational artists in the late 19th century in the United States, after he had already passed, really. So an artist who had built this kind of reputation, and through a number of his followers in Rome, who kind of endured, carried on his legacy and his kind of stylistic innovations, but an artist that I think is much more varied than maybe people know from the works that were sort of collected in the Gilded Age, the sort of Rococo revival kind of interior scenes, but an artist who really had a much wider kind of realist range as well. So an artist that I think could stand to be better understood in the United States, perhaps, or more contextualized, perhaps historically, than he is.
Yeah.
Clara? the other way around.
I will choose American ones, yes. I think I would go with two names that have already come up today, and that would be Marika Sachs, because I think she's such an interesting figure, not only as an artist, but also like as a connection between American collectors and American artists and the French world, everything that was happening with the Impressionists. And yeah, she was sort of connecting everyone and making things possible for many artists. And then I would go with Winslow Hummer, which is an artist I really like. And we have several works by Hummer in our collection. And it's not really well known in Spain. So I think he's wonderful with in many aspects, in his watercolors and his paintings during the war in the US. I don't know, many we have like a very wide range of works by Winslow Hummer. His connection with photography, I don't know, I think there's so much we could learn from Hummer and so much we could show.
Okay, great. We're almost finishing. So just for the audience to know, would you each one tell when is the show happening in your museum? Because we'll be talking about it, so that maybe people don't know exactly when are the dates. When is this when it ends in Norfolk, when it starts in Milwaukee and it ends, and when the Georgia O'Keeffe starts in Madrid? Corey.
Sure. So the exhibition is at the Chrysler until May 16th. And then if I'll speak for Brandon, it opens June 11th at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and it's there through October 3rd.
Mm-hmm. And here in Madrid, we will open the Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition next Tuesday. That's April the 20th, and it will go on until August the 8th. And then people will have a chance to see it in Paris from early September until mid-December. And then in Switzerland, beginning in January until May. So O'Keeffe is going to be traveling around Europe for quite some time.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think it was fascinating to hear all these connections. I think that it's very also refreshing to see that things keep going, that we all have projects, and that we're all eager to do in-person activities, and it's happening already, as Clara was saying, in Spain, and people have been able to see the exhibition in Norfolk, and they would do in Milwaukee. But the idea that we still have these projects to put together our different cultures, I think it's great, because that's what at the beginning, that's what the exhibition that you're showing in Norfolk did, no? There's people traveling to a different country, seeing things, and then being inspired by them, no? I want to tell you that we're doing this, we have this project here in the embassy of doing like this map of the art of Spain in the States, because there's a huge, we've been fascinated by the idea that the small museums that have artworks from Spain in different places. So we want to make this map and show where they are, so that people can know it and people can visit it too. So we'll let you post it with that, because I think it's interesting also. We know in the big museums what they have, but not everyone knows. So how much spread is the Spanish art in the American museum? So thank you all for being here. We're very happy to have this Café Transatlántico with you, and we'll invite everyone to see the exhibitions where they are and to enjoy art. Thanks a lot, Clara. Thanks a lot, Corey. Thanks a lot, Brandon.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Take care, everyone.
With you.